Alright, welcome back, smart people. Today I'm assembling the bottom of the mainframe for the Astro Troubillon mechanical clock. Good bit of pieces here, and again I apologize for the horrible part names. I'm wondering if I should do a remix of this on Thingiverse just to give these things good names, and then also to provide some meaningful documentation on how to get this thing together, because some of this is a little crazy and a little bunch of assumptions are being made. But let's start into this. Let's walk through the parts to begin with. For this, we have a pair of 12.4 by 18 by 1.5 millimeter spacers. These little silver things. These are known as mainframe bottom 12.4 x18 x 1.5 millimeter spacers. Next up, we have the mainframe bottom 18T gear plus shaft 2. This gold piece here. In addition to that, we have two more spacers, which I've already glued to these sprockets. There's a pair of them, these silver pieces. These are known as mainframe bottom 24 by 35 by 1.5 millimeter spacers, and the other one is a 24 by 35 by 1 millimeter spacer. This is the 1.5. This is the 1 millimeter thick one. They come into play later on. They do need to be glued to the narrow side of these gears. Next up, the big blue part, we have the mainframe bottom 2. Next up, in bronze here, we've got the mainframe bottom, mainframe top A, which is a relatively complex part to print. I believe that took about 8 hours for me. We then have this, I don't know, almost Prince-like shape. That's mainframe bottom, mainframe top B. In gold, we then have the mainframe bottom, mainframe top C, which has a bunch of parts on it. I built myself a couple little spacers to go on this rod. I didn't like the one that came with it. It did not print correctly and was being problematic. In silver, we have our main drum. We then also have in silver the mainframe bottom ratchet. We have a 24 tooth gear, a pair of 30 tooth bevel gears, these two in gold, a set of three 10 tooth bevel 3 gears, 1, 2, and there's one in the drum already. In white, we've got a 30 tooth gear, and that's it for the printed parts here. In addition to that, we've also got 3 12 by 28 by 8. The smaller 3 here are 8 by 22 by 7. These go into various parts later on. We have a total of 3 13 millimeter long, 2 millimeter diameter shafts, one of which is already in the drum with the gear. 2 millimeter diameter by 46 millimeter shaft that will hold some parts later on. We need 3 M2 by 20 millimeter bolts. Pardon me for saying screws earlier. These are not tapered, so these are bolts. And then we have a total of 8 M2.5 by 8 millimeter cap bolts as well. I think this is all the parts. So prep work on all of them. Starting with the 18 tooth gear plus shaft 2 here. This needed to have the pin in the bottom of it, or pardon me, the hole in the bottom of it reamed out to smoothly rotate on a 2 millimeter diameter shaft. And then I needed to sand down the center segment of it here. So hopefully everybody can see. Sand down the center segment of it so that it would easily fit inside one of the smaller bearings. And then I needed to sand down the hex head on it such that the 24 tooth gear would smoothly fit on it. Things were a bit tight to begin with. Now for mainframe bottom 2, the big blue piece here. For mainframe bottom 2, there's a 2 millimeter hole here that needs to be reamed out to hold a shaft. And then there is also a set of 8, and there on each one of these posts, 2 on each post, 2 2.5 holes that needed to be tapped for these bolts later on. For mainframe top A here, this big toothed piece, there are a total of 4 M.2 holes on the underside of it, The one that is further away from the center needs to be reamed out for a 2mm shaft, and the others needed to be threaded so that M2 screws could go into them, these screws that we'll use later on. And also you may need to sand out the center a bit so that it holds a pair of 8x22x7 bearings. These. And for mainframe top A, which is this piece, basically all 9 of these holes need to be reamed out so the center ones fit over, or pardon me, the end ones on either leg fit over the pins on this part, and a M2 screw will go through them and through the holes in that part. Then in terms of mainframe top C, this piece, the M2 holes here need to be reamed out, all 3 of them. The spot here for a bearing may need to be sanded so the bearing fits snugly or smoothly. And then around the edge on all of these we have a total of 8 M2.5 holes that need to be reamed out so that the bolts can smoothly go through them and fit into the threaded parts of the frame. For the drum, this has a number of holes in it. There is a very small M.2 hole here that needs to be threaded and a bolt put into it. This is going to hold the string or fishing line that's used to hold the weight later on. There are 3 M.2 shaft holes that need to be reamed out so that the shafts can easily fit into them. And in the center, you may need to sand it out such that one of the large bearings can fit into it as well. For the ratchet, this needs to be reamed out so that it smoothly rotates on a 2mm rod. For the 30-tooth bevel gears, these may need to be reamed out on the inside a little bit and sanded such that the large bearings fit in them. For the 10-tooth T bevel gears, the 3 of them, they need to be reamed out so they easily spin on a 13mm long, 2mm wide shaft. And then, as you see here, for these, I have already glued the 1 and the 1.5mm spacer to these bevel gears. Basically, you need to center these by eyeball. They do not need to be perfect. Basically, you're putting them here so the large bearings do not work themselves out of the upper face on each one of these, and just glue them into place. So let's start by putting things together. We'll begin with the drum. I already have one of the bevel gears in here. I assembled this earlier to make sure I could get it together, and then I could not get that one shaft out, so I just left it in place. So we take these, and this might be a little difficult to see. The pins go in and fit snugly so that the bevel gears can rotate. Do one more. Like so. And then when we put one of the large bearings here, that will keep all of those pins from working themselves out towards the center. So that's in place now. Part of the frame here. One of the smaller bearings goes in there. Our large piece here, copper bearing goes into either end, like so. For our bevel gears, they each get one of these large bearings, and that should fit snugly. And as I said, the spacers there are to keep it from popping out. Now let's start building this up from the bottom. So we start out with our 30-tooth bevel gear that has the thicker of the 2 spacers, the 1.5mm spacer on it. It goes on the very bottom. By the way, you may need to sand down the center shaft in order to get the bearings to fit properly. So once that is in place, we can now drop our drum there. I'm now going to place the ratchet. Let's make sure everybody can see this here. The ratchet on the long shaft with the, don't know if you can see on the ratchet, one side has a little bit of a convex protuberance and the other side's flat. The side with the convex expansion faces down. Get that into that pinhole. Look at that. And we take our other bevel gear, put this side down, like yay. And we take our two 12.4 by 18 by 1.5 millimeter spacers, put them on top. And at this point, things should turn relatively smoothly. If you engage the ratchet, things should still spin. This is going to be end up how you end up winding things later on. And then our small gear with shaft here goes on top of there. Next, we need to assemble these three pieces together. So, the screws start, or the bolts start on the back of this piece of the frame and go up. And this is used, it'll end up fitting like this in an attempt to keep that bearing in place. And we'll run these long M.2 screws through the whole thing. And put the ugly side hiding, if you have an ugly side. Alright, now all that is affixed together properly. And at this point, this goes on this. But first, here's our 39 tooth gear. Later on from the mainframe, we will have a shaft with a hex end on it that will come down through these bearings and mate into this. But for the time being, that needs to slide in there. Start to get this lined up, and this goes on the end of the hex shaft that protrudes through that small bearing. And this is before all the screws go in place, and now things should turn one direction very easily, and the ratchet should engage the other direction and turn stuff like so. See if you can get that in there. Like that. And now the various screws go in here to retain the whole thing. Really exciting commentary watching me put in screws. Pardon me, bolts. I gotta break that habit. They're definitely bolts, they're not screws. And there we are, the mainframe bottom. Rotating pieces and ratcheting. Ta-da! See you again next time for the rest of the mainframe, and then hopefully one video after that fitting this all together, and I really hope it works. If not, there'll be several videos on how I went about fixing it to get it to work. Take care, everybody. See you later.